Hi, I'm James Martis with Plus One, a proud member of NTCA, and I want to welcome you to the Smart Rural Community 3-part Senior Safety Series designed to keep you safe online. You can expect to learn how to create strong passwords, what to do if you experience a data breach, and how to recognize phishing attempts before they catch you. Whether you watch the videos individually or as a complete set, you'll discover helpful tips and tools presented in a practical and straightforward way to protect yourself confidently. Your guide to online safety is around the corner. Well, let's jump into passwords and protecting yourself online. So what are we looking at here? Team Password puts together a list of actually the top 50 most common passwords used today. I'm showing you the top 24. Why? Because probably there's one on here that you've either used before or unfortunately might still be using today. Everything from something as simple as 123456 to admin to monkey to welcome to some form of the word password. And we know we shouldn't be doing that, right? Let me give you some other password statistics that I hope after hearing them will frighten you a little bit more. But the average person today manages 168 passwords. Now, in doing the research for this session, I found everything from 80 to something over 200 passwords that we tend to be managing. And obviously it depends on our age, whether we're still working or not. But even if you're someone who is 60 and over or a senior, you've got 30 years of passwords that you created over 3 decades. Multiple accounts that you may not even use anymore. You've completely forgotten about, but still exist with a password that you actually might still be using today in another account. A 12-character password is 62 trillion times more difficult to crack compared to a 6-character password. Now, you don't need to remember that number, but what's most important to know is that obviously the longer the password, the harder it is to crack. Multi-factor authentication, or MFA, or two-factor authentication, 2FA as it's often called, blocks almost all attacks. And so this is a very important point. It's something I'm going to cover a little bit later. So in addition to your username and password, you often will get another factor, normally a texted code to your cell phone or smartphone that you also have to enter. Hackers have published over 555 million stolen passwords on the dark web since 2017, and this was something noted in 2020. So think about that. Over the last 5 years, how many more millions and millions of our passwords exist on the dark web and are being sold to nefarious actors? 80% of hacking incidents are caused by stolen or reused login information. And about half of us still use the same password for all of our accounts. Now, if you don't use different passwords for your accounts or use password managers, this is the most important point I'm going to tell you in this session. And it's these last 2 statistics that I hope bring that home. 60% of us say that we get lazy when creating passwords because it's hard. It's hard to remember lots of passwords. But now over a third of us are now saying in surveys that we're using password managers. And these are increasingly important. And I'll explain that a little bit later on how you can get one set up if you don't already have one. Now here are some workplace practices, and you might think, why are we talking about workplace practices? Well, the reality is that many of these practices bleed into our personal lives as well. A third of workers say they use their child's name or birthday for their passwords. I'm sure many of us personally do the same thing, whether it's for a bank account or a Netflix account. We've got almost half of workers, or over 4 in 10, reusing passwords from personal and work accounts. So if you're someone who's retired, it's very likely that maybe a password you used at work, you're now using on a personal account or vice versa. You've got almost 2 in 3 workers writing down passwords on sticky notes. I remember my mother having many sticky notes with passwords around her desk or inside her purse or inside a wallet because that's how she tried to remember them. And I know many of us still do that today. 2/3 of us are sharing passwords via text message or email. I'm guilty of that. I've sent text messages to someone at work needing a password to log into an account, and I've texted them the password, something that I clearly shouldn't do. Half of us are just writing down our passwords on a plain text document on our computer. Now, this is at work, but I know that many of us do this at home as well. One report shows that employees reuse passwords 13 times on average. And this is from LastPass, a password manager. So they have actual data of people who are using a password manager and still reusing passwords with their password manager. We should put our hair on fire because they're already using a password manager. So why are they doing that? And almost 2/3 of companies have more than 500 passwords that do not expire. We've all felt the inconvenience of being told it's time to change your password, whether via email or text. And why does that happen? Because the application recognizes whatever it is that we're often reusing our passwords or have passwords that are too easy to break. So they're trying to force us, in one sense, to get a little creative and to hopefully not reuse our password. But the reality is, just because I'm forced to change my password doesn't mean I don't just change it to another one that I'm reusing. And that's why sometimes when you type it in, it'll tell you, hey, you've actually used this password before, you can't use it again, because they know that that's what we do. And why cover all of these statistics? Because the reality is, whether we're 18 or 68, there's really only so many passwords we remember or can remember. In fact, statistically, when I was doing research for this survey, for this session, I found that whether it was a study done over a quarter a century ago that found that we on average only remembered 4 to 5 unique passwords, Microsoft did a big study a few years later. They found that we did about 6.5 for an average of 25 accounts. And another large study was done in 2012 that found that on average, we remember about 4 unique passwords. So no big change from even over a quarter a century ago. So if we're managing 20, 40, 100, 168 accounts, how are we doing that if we really only remember about 4, 5, 6, or 7 passwords? Well, we're reusing them, unfortunately, and that is very, very dangerous. And why do we need strong passwords? Well, we need them to protect our accounts because those are what protect our identity, it protects our money and our finances, and it protects our data, including our health information. If you crack my account in one account, and I'm reusing that password in other accounts, I've just given you access to my entire life potentially, my entire finances potentially. It's not something we want to do. Now I want to cover some guidance provided by the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. So CISA is under the Department of Homeland Security. And they give guidance on what we should do to protect ourselves and to create better passwords. But they start off with a vignette or a little story to explain why this is so important. And I think it's actually really appropriate to cover it here. And they say, here's Emma, who got a text message on her phone saying that hundreds of dollars had been debited from her bank account. And she thought, well, I didn't do that. I better log into my bank account right now to find out what this is about. The problem is she couldn't get into her bank account because the password had changed. And she thought, well, that's odd. Well, let me reset the password. So she went through the reset process where a link was sent to her email, right, as we're all very familiar with. But the problem was she couldn't get into her email either because the hacker had figured out that she had used the same password for both accounts, her email and her bank. So once they figured out one, they had changed both. So now she's locked out of her email. Now I want you to imagine this horrendous scenario. Now that hacker technically could probably access all of her accounts. He could go to any account that's ever sent an email to her email and just sit there and start changing all of her passwords. So in addition to having this bank problem, right, all of her financial accounts or all of her accounts, maybe medical accounts, insurance accounts, could all be compromised as well. Just consider that nightmare, for example, for reusing a password. So what does CISA say we should do, this Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency? Well, the first bit of guidance it gives is it says we should make our passwords long. And I already explained earlier why just jumping from 6 characters to 12 characters makes it so much more difficult to guess a password. And CISA says you should do at least 16 characters if you can, because the longer the password, the better the password. And why is that? Well, I've done the math for you here, and it's a lot of math. 16 characters gives you 335 septillion options, apparently. And how do you get that number, or why is this number so big? Because for each character, you could have 26 lowercase letters, 26 uppercase letters, 10 digits from 0 to 9, and 33 special characters, for a total of 95 different options for each character. That's 95 to the 16th power, coming out to this gigantic number on the screen. That's why we want our passwords to be 16 or more characters long, to make it that much more difficult. So 1, make them long. The second bit of advice that CISA gives us is to make them random. We don't just want a 16-character word that's easy to guess. We want it to be a long combination of those uppercase and lowercase and numbers and symbols, right? So that it doesn't make any sense and it's not something that we can remember. If you're looking at the screen here, that YUC $8 so forth is very hard to remember. I probably wouldn't even remember that to use in one instance. But that's why we want to use those and make them that hard, because we don't want them to be easily memorable or something that can be hacked. The third bit of advice is to make them unique, meaning do not reuse the same password in more than one account, which I think we can all recognize we're all guilty of doing at some point or another. I'm still guilty of it today, right? I still have some accounts that I should probably close down because I've reused that password on other accounts. But the reality is if anyone ever breaks into that service, even if I haven't used that service in 10 years, and think of it, if you're a senior, I guarantee you have created accounts that you haven't even thought of in 5 or 10 years that still exist. Now imagine if that company gets breached. Someone cracks that company's data. They steal your password from that account that you're reusing years later in other accounts. You forgot about that service entirely. Well, now they have access to break into your other accounts today. And that's why you want to make sure that they're unique. So again, what does CISA under the Department of Homeland Security say? They say make them long, make them random, and make them unique. But again, how are you going to remember these incredibly long, unique passwords? Well, this is probably the kicker of the advice provided by the Department of Homeland Security. And arguably the most important lesson in this session is to make sure that you're using a password manager that statistically a little over 1 in 3 of us are doing today. So we need the rest of us to begin adopting password managers as well. And that's an application that creates the long passwords for us. We don't even know them ourselves, and it fills them in for us as we're logging into our applications. All we need to know is one super hard master password for ourselves. And why get them? Because we have too many passwords. If you're managing over 100 accounts, think I've got a couple bank accounts, maybe an insurance account, a Medicare account, a Netflix account, I've got a Zoom account, and I could continue going on and on. How am I going to remember all of these 16-character passwords that are unique for each account? I can't do it. I'm not that smart. Most of us aren't. You need an application to do that for you. Browsers do offer rudimentary solutions, and they're certainly better than nothing, but they're not dedicated to that purpose. And I would prefer to have a company that's focused on the security of password management to manage all of my passwords. Now, Apple and Google do have free options, and again, they're better than nothing. But again, my advice to you would be to get that dedicated solution that's designed to be elegant and smooth and quick and just works well, because that's what it's meant to do. Now, if you're out there and you've never even looked at password managers, I'm not pushing any one of these in particular. I don't own stock in any of these, but here are 4 sort of name brand password managers and how they're described by other technology companies, whether it's Wired, CNET, or TechRadar, just to give you an idea. Wired says that Bitwarden is best for most people, while CNET says it's the best overall, and TechRadar says it's the best with a free option. Wired says that 1Password, that's the one that I use. Again, I'm not pushing this one in particular. It's just the one I'm most familiar with. Wired says it's the best upgrade option, while CNET says the best premium option, and TechRadar says it's best for families, and so forth. You can see what they say for Dashlane and NordPass as well. Now, these are just 4 password managers and how they're described. There are many other password managers out there, and you should check them out to look at the cost, to look at the feature set that comes with each one. But these are 4 popular ones just to get you rolling if you're not familiar with them at all. Now, you may be asking yourself, how much do these things cost? Well, as I mentioned, there are free options, but as we tend to know, if it's free, it's usually very limited, and it is very limited. But there are free options out there. What's great is they often offer free trials, so you can test it out. Make sure, do I like the way this works? Is it as easy to use as I need it to be before you make an investment or a commitment? But even that investment, we're talking about $1 to maybe a handful of dollars a month that you can cancel at any time. But that's generally what you're looking at for even those 4 name brand passwords that I just covered here a second ago. Now, if you get a password manager, and I'm often asked about this, well, James, what if somebody cracks your password manager password? Don't they then have access to all of your other passwords? Actually, no. And I'm going to explain that a little later on here, why that's the case. But it is true that you want your master password for your password manager to be unbreakable, right? And I'm going to give you some hints on how to do that here shortly. But you should still consider turning on multi-factor or 2-factor authentication, which is getting that extra factor. And again, I'll talk about that a bit here in a minute, but that's always something you should turn on the other accounts, like your bank accounts or your financial accounts or your medical accounts, that way to further protect that data. So if you download a password manager onto your phone, you then can also download that application for the browser that you use on your computer or your tablet. So if you're using Chrome or Safari, for example, it's just a browser extension that then syncs with your device, with your handheld device, so that way the password management is happening. And then when you're logging into an account, the password manager knows what to do. It can automatically enter in your username and your password for you. And what's great, the password manager, you can tell it, create a password that's 16, 20, 25 characters long, and then that's all you know. And then it creates the password, sets up the account, and then it'll enter in that information for you the next time you need to log into that account. But it can also enter in other information. Think credit card information, your name and address. We have to fill out forms all the time online. You can put that information into your password managers and have them fill in those forms, because it's really the same concept, right? It's filling in a username, it's filling in a password. It can fill in other data that you tend to fill in consistently, personal data, medical data, account information. You can put it in the account so that way it's in there. You don't have to spend the time doing it when every time you've got to do it, the password manager will just do it for you. And that's why you want these dedicated solutions, because they're so good at doing that. And I want you to remember, though, that the most important part is the password management. So if you don't want to use all these features, or you feel like, James, my goodness, this is a whole lot here, I don't want to have to look at all this, don't worry about it. Don't look at it. Just use the password management. But I'm going to show you why these other features are also beneficial to us. So in this case, we're looking at the Watchtower, which is provided by 1Password, the one that I'm most familiar with. And it'll give me a snapshot of compromised websites that maybe my email address has been found in from a data breach. It'll show me how many times I'm reusing a password, or tell me, hey, James, out of all the accounts that you've got, these are some weak passwords that you should probably update. And it's as easy as I go to the account, log in, and change the password. And I tell the password manager to create a complex password. And when I say tell it, it's literally just clicking a button. I say, yep, there's a new password. It just generates this long string of gobbledygook that I'm never going to remember. It's just going to manage. It adds it to that account. And now I can go about my day. And now I've got effectively an uncrackable password. Now, again, that password manager, though, does need a strong password. So what should we do about that? It should not be your child's name and their birth month, right? I think we've already agreed and covered that. We can't use that anymore. What we should use are things like a story or mnemonic device, create a sentence that's personal to you, and then turn it into an acronym, for example. So my first car was a blue Honda in 2005, might become MFCW ampersand BH underscore 2005 exclamation point, right? So it means this sentence that's personal to me, that really nobody else may know, but now I've changed it up because I've turned it into an acronym and I've added in numbers and some symbols, right? That becomes increasingly very hard to crack. And those are the types of things that we should do. We also might create a passphrase, as I've covered before. Something like, I always eat breakfast at 7 could become something like 1A3B at 7 exclamation point. So again, make it strong, make it long, but make it personal, something that you can remember and you know how you've changed it up. Now, I've mentioned MFA or multi-factor authentication or 2FA, two-factor authentication. They essentially mean the same thing a couple of times now. And really all I'm talking about, and we have all done it before, most of us have, is getting that texted code to our cell phone. It's really an extra factor. So if you think about it, there's the username as a factor. The password is the most important factor that we're talking about here. And then a third factor might be a texted code to my phone before it allows me to actually access the account. And we're all very familiar with this. And you saw the statistic that if we do that, we effectively make it almost impossible to crack our accounts, because even if you got my username and password, you can't log into my bank account if I have MFA or 2FA turned on, because you still have to have access to the code that's going to be texted. And that's why it becomes effectively uncrackable, at least on a personal level, accessing that particular account. Now, there are many factors out there. It could be another password or a PIN. It could be a USB key. It could be a fingerprint. If you have a fingerprint reader, we don't always have that, but what we all have are smartphones that can get text messages. And so that tends to be the easiest, most elegant solution that we implement. But there are other factors out there, and I want to recognize that other factors exist. So in summary, we need a strong master password for that password manager. Be sure to turn on multi-factor or two-factor authentication, particularly on those sensitive accounts. Think bank accounts or your Medicare account or an insurance plan. Anything that you know, I don't want anyone breaking into my Netflix, but I definitely don't want them breaking into my bank account. So you should probably turn on MFA for your bank account, even if you don't want to turn it on for your Netflix account. And bonus, turn on notifications. Increasingly, you can get notified with almost any financial institution when anything has happened on that account. So you can get a text message to say, hey, a charge just occurred. You just bought something, or money was wired, or money was transferred or withdrawn. And why? Well, that way you're at least notified when something happens and can act on it to make sure if it's not something that you authorized. That's a wrap on this session of the Smart Rural Community 3-part Senior Safety Series. We hope you enjoyed learning about these tips and tools to keep you safe online. We would also like to thank our promotional partner, Calix, for their support of the series and the Smart Rural Community Program. To learn more, please visit smartruralcommunity.org/senior safety. See you next time and stay safe.